Hey, listeners. Welcome to the Relationship School podcast. Thanks for tuning into the show. This week's episode is a re-release of an older episode that our listeners loved. We hope you dig it.
All right, welcome to the show, Steve Porges.
Thank you, Jason. It's good to be there with you.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for your time. And Steve, I did a formal intro a minute ago, but I'd love to, just by way of you introducing yourself, as you know, this is a long-term partnership podcast, and we explore the challenges of intimacy over the long term. And why I reached out to you specifically was because I'm fascinated with your work and the Vegas social engagement system and how it shows up in a partnership and the threat response all day long that happens in between a couple. And you have done really groundbreaking work there. And so I wanted to bring you on and tell us a little bit about that and why that could benefit us the more we know about safety in a relationship. So will you give us a sense of, like, I'm curious just biographically, who are you? What are you up to? Are you married, kids, no kids, that kind of thing?
Okay. Of course, I'm an academic. I've been in academia for since 1970. I've been actually a faculty member since 1970. So the decades keep moving on and on. I started off being very interested in the neurophysiology of basically what was going on in people's nervous systems when you didn't hear them talking. So I was interested in a what was then a new discipline called psychophysiology, with the whole idea that you could measure autonomic measures, and that would tell you something about sustained attention, what they like, certain things. I got intrigued with that, and this is now when I was in grad school. And then when I became a faculty member, I started to study newborn babies. I studied human fetuses as they reacted during delivery. I moved into early childhood. I did studies in aging. I did animal work to look at the mechanisms. But the whole journey was a journey of understanding how people respond to both physical stimuli and then social stimuli. So there is a big important segue here. So in the mid-1990s, 1994, I developed the polyvagal theory. And that was really a theoretical model that was challenged by observing that physiological responses mediated through a nerve called the vagus could both be healthy, protective, but they also could be lethal. And that's where my work with newborn babies and premature babies led me. And in trying to answer that question, I learned that through evolution and through development, there really were two vagal circuits. A new one that occurred in the mammal as the mammal matured that linked a neural regulation of the autonomic nervous system through the vagus with facial expressivity, vocalization. So we're now into your world of connectedness.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that is because mammals could not survive without being connected. When they were born, they were dependent, and actually, when they got older, they were still dependent. They were dependent upon cues from a significant other that they were in a safe environment. So my work moved from, in a sense, looking for diagnostics for vulnerability in the nervous system to, in a sense, understanding the underlying neural platform for social behavior. And I think that brings me to your podcast, is really the whole notion that polyvagal theory was not merely a theory that explained physiological reactivity to the environment. It was a theory that explained our biological imperative to connect with another, because it provided the mechanisms for detecting risk in the environment and the mechanisms for turning off those risk behaviors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so powerful. And we're specifically talking about some of the parasympathetic response, right?
Yeah. Actually, let me kind of elaborate on that. And we like to use global terms like sympathetic. We talk about activation and arousal and support for fight flight. And we think always of the parasympathetic as our soothing or calming system. And in part, it's correct, but it's not totally correct, because our autonomic nervous system is really hierarchically organized to react to challenges. Now, that's a very loaded phrase. And that hierarchy is really based upon what circuits evolved later through evolution or what evolved earlier. So our newest circuit is really this mammalian vagal circuit that's linked with our face, the muscles of our face. So if you're talking about relationships, you're talking about cues from the face, cues from the voice, cues of gesture and intonation of voice, and intentionality of facial and hand movements.
This is the social engagement system.
Right,
Yep.
right. But it's not merely a motor system going outward. It also is a tuning system that enables us to hear human voice more acutely, more accurately, and we give up the ability to detect low frequency predator sounds. So we basically are living in, I'm going to use the term yin yang. We're living in, is it good for us to be defensive and to detect threat in the environment? If it is, then we can't engage and co-regulate with another, but we do use our neural circuits to survive. But if the cues are now cues of safety, cues of love, and cues of trust, then those defensive behaviors turn off. Put in another way is if when we're with significant others, the responsibility of the relationship, of that co-regulatory relationship, is to keep our autonomic nervous system out of states of defense. And when you
Yep.
keep it out of states of defense, you facilitate not only the social bond and all these wonderful things, you also facilitate health, growth, and restoration. And so there's kind of like a phrase I use, and that is the nervous system of social behavior is the nervous system of health, growth, and restoration. It's the
Mm.
same circuit.
Yeah, and this gets really complicated, of course, because if my tone of voice is threatening to you,
Mm.
in a moment in the house and we're married, all of a
Uh-huh.
sudden you're in a threat response.
What's really quite unique about the let's use the word feature detectors built into our nervous system and the triggers that have people respond is that our reactivity, our triggers, we tend to respond outside of the realm of awareness. Although our physiological response to those cues are often very, very, we become aware of that. So we get these massive bodily responses and we don't know why we responded. And this is really what you're talking about, I believe, in terms of ruptures and difficulties in repairing within a relationship, is because the body has responded, and now the smart brain, which we do have, tries to make sense out of those responses and
Mm-hmm.
comes up with a narrative that may have nothing to do with reality. The reality may be that the person's basically. I'll give a perfect example. This morning when I got up, I had a little. We in the medical world, you call it a little bit of vasovagal response. In the sense, I started to get faint when I stood up very quickly. Now, the projection of that on my face was a total flat face. So I asked my wife what she thought my face meant. She said that she felt that she had done something wrong. She didn't
Mm-hmm.
violate an expectancy. It had nothing to do with you. It had to do with my physiology
Yep.
shifting, and it was a physiological reflex. But her need to be helpful and not to do anything wrong, and this is really part of the issues in many couples, was to create that narrative. Now, I have to tell you a little bit here because my wife is not any normal wife. My wife is Sue Carter, and she is the scientist who discovered the relationship between oxytocin and social behavior. So there's a common thread here within both within our marriage and our research, and uh, she likes. I'll give her credit. I won't just say she likes to take credit. I'll give her credit
Yeah.
for encouraging me to study social behavior because that was her realm.
Mm.
And I was much more involved in, let's say, cognitive reactions and using physiological measures as indicators of health in babies. And then when I developed the polyvagal theory, suddenly what she had been working on and what I had been working on became, in a sense, very similar. And the reason it became similar is that the areas of the brainstem that regulate what I call the social engagement system with this mammalian myelinated vagus and the links that create the facial expressivity and intonation, that whole area of the brainstem is bathed in receptors of oxytocin. So oxytocin,
Fascinating.
and what's even more important, the older vagus, which is our shutdown defecation response when it gets recruited in defense, that's just has even more oxytocin receptors because that system is involved in giving birth, and during the birthing process, all these subdiaphragmatic organs below the diaphragm are responding, and they're not producing the person's not passing out, and the person's not defecating. It's because that area of the brainstem is just being bathed in oxytocin. So it
Mm.
enables immobilization without fear. And now, if
Wow.
we want to float into your world of couples and relationship, what is the objective of a relationship? We'll use a pragmatic one and say to co-regulate, and then we'll use a more illustrative one, and that is to immobilize without fear, because immobilization without fear is what we call intimacy. That
Uh-huh.
we are, in a sense, not all our defenses are gone as we hold each other and near each other, and we don't need words because the bodies conform and feel safe with each other. And so you can see that Sue's work on oxytocin and my work on the autonomic nervous system have kind of both a shared agenda, but they have overlapping areas. So I used to say
Yeah.
we had independent research for a couple of decades, and then we got reacquainted in the brainstem. So
Wow.
the
Yep.
point is that once you start seeing the commonality of the mechanisms, it starts making a lot more sense.
I mean, I have to imagine that you guys worked your own process together enough to feel safe enough to discover this together to kind of find that bridge.
I would say that the beauty of an academic family is the respect to allow an individual to do what they want to do without forcing the bridge.
Uh-huh.
So in a sense, because in the academic world and in any world, you have to create your own identity before you are empowered to share along, especially intellectual levels. So we were quite established. We were both full professors for several years, maybe close to 10 years, before we start to realize what we were doing was very similar. And then we went into joint papers, joint conferences. Sue organized some conferences. I participated, and as a dutiful spouse, I felt that I had to talk about something that was related to what you wanted her meeting to be about, and so I worked.
Yeah.
And I helped, in a sense, build the bridge. I built the bridge of in basically being able to talk about vasopressin, which is another neuropeptide,
Yeah.
and oxytocin within the context of polyvagal theory. So you could take her corpus of her work, and it could be explained within a polyvagal, or let's say applied within a polyvagal world. So the polyvagal theory is as much broader strokes of conceptualization, and Sue's work was really very more mechanistic in terms of brain areas and specific types of behaviors, like bonding and like disrupt. Actually, whether or not through manipulations, whether the animals that she worked with, which were this little prairie vole, whether those animals could bond or had difficulty in bonding, and whether they could parent.
Yeah. Powerful.
Yeah.
How long have you guys been married?
I have to now think, okay, um, 47 years.
Wow.
Or,
I imagine.
excuse me, almost 47. 40.
Okay.
And,
Nice.
yeah.
I can imagine that you guys, over the arc of that 47 years, you guys have learned a few things. And would you say that your work together and separately has changed how you relate to each other and how you calm and soothe each other?
I would say that during the past, I think since we're going to talk about relationships and marriages, let me bring my kids into the story, because kids are a major focal point in many marriages, as they
Yeah.
were in ours.
How many kids do you have?
We have two. We have
Okay.
two boys. One is going to be 37, and one will be 34. So this summer they'll be there. The older one happens to have, I use the term, inherited the family business. He's a faculty member at the University of Florida, and he studies both the autonomics, he studies the neuropeptides, but his main area is actually brain imaging,
Mm.
which is really, so he takes from both of us and then puts his own point on it.
Cool.
And the younger one is a tech writer who is actually writing a book with Sue, and also involved with several projects with me, applying some of my technologies into the business world. So it's been quite interesting. But what I wanted to talk about was really the fact that we didn't have kids for the first 10 years of our marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And so our marriage was different before kids. It was
Absolutely.
different with kids, and it was different after kids. which was a very, startling, because you have a relationship and you watch how these things change. And so after kids, I felt was a even greater challenge than any of the other periods of time
Interesting. Yeah.
because it forced an acknowledgement of the differences between us. So when you're married with kids, you basically blend into one integrated family unit of dealing with kids and alternating responsibility. But when the children aren't there as that focal point, you then start appreciating the uniquenesses of each other, and then you actually, with those uniquenesses, and this gets into the term I call neuroception, you start understanding your responses to different cues, triggers that you never realized because you had already created different narratives, like overwhelmed with the kids, tenure decisions, publications, grant reviews. So you put an overlay with a whole series of narratives. And when you're, in a sense, at the other end, you start seeing, in a sense, the more, I was going to use the term almost ritualized or systematic way in which you respond and your spouse responds. And then you try to figure out where the cues are and try actually to apply these theories to understand it. So the ability to co-regulate is, in a sense, our goal in life. But the other part that we have is we often lack an appreciation of the cues that are the ruptures that disrupt us. And that's really what I've learned a lot more about. And it gets extraordinary. I use the term, I don't even, I'm going to use it, dangerous. It becomes extraordinarily dangerous as you flip from a visceral, implicit body to this cognitive, pedantic individual. Because as you do that, you shift your spouse or your mate or your partner into you shift their physiological states. And then if you start saying you did this or that does that, you can see immediately this structuring of the inquiry, the questions, shift the physiological state of the other.
Which
And
then
so,
shifts your physiological state.
of course. So now you're in this cycle. So the real issue is, how do you get out of those cycles? Polyvagal theory says you get out of those cycles with cues of love and safety. And those are not the same thing as saying you did this, you should know better.
No, right. Yeah. Yeah. So you're basically saying you learned how to be a safe presence in your wife's life.
You try.
You're learning.
You're
ongoing learning.
I think, you see, this is the part which probably your audience is concerned about. I think it is a continuous process, and I think it's a continuous process of both sensitivity and a sense of awareness of self. So whenever our bodies react, this is kind of the rules that I'm trying to structure. When we react, and you're aware of bodies reacting, because I can see in your face that there are reactions. So the issue is, when your body reacts, my message is stop. Just stop. Take the silence, take the mode, and before you come up with the reflexive, initial reactive defensive explanation, just stop and functionally appreciate the fact that your body reacted. And then second, have a degree of, it's kind of this blended word. I'm going to use the word compassion and also benevolence. So you have compassion for yourself, but also benevolence for the person who triggered you, because you have to know that once you react, you're triggering that other person. But if you can take that moment of silence, and the term I use is basically take an aha of this visceral response. And here is the critical point: our bodies can respond to things that are totally unrelated to our spouse. Let's say you're in an apartment and there's doing construction near you, and so there's a lot of vibrations and a lot of noise. Now, our body responds to that as if there's predator around us. So our ability to be both compassionate and benevolent to others is going to be very limited, or even compassionate to ourselves. Our body is, in a sense, absorbing these cues of danger. We're tolerating it, but then someone comes into our environment and may look at us, start a conversation, and then just turn away for a moment. And that disruption of turning away could be sufficient to create a whole blowout in a couple's relationship.
Yeah.
And so, but if when that person turns away, there's literally a moment of silence, of holding it, perhaps for both,
Mm-hmm.
and saying, wow, you turned away from me and I got this reaction. And then the person who says, I turned away, I saw in your face all this tension and I couldn't deal with it. And so I turned away.
Even though
But
the tension actually had to do with the construction, it had nothing to do
right.
with the person.
Well, it went into the person. It
Yeah.
bled into the
That's
person.
the neuroception.
Yes. And the issue is we're so okay, in general, we're unaware of the cues that are triggering, but we are extraordinarily aware of our bodily responses. So if our body responds and we're in proximity to another person, we want to create a different narrative. So we have to hold that feeling in time for a moment and start coming up with other plausible explanations.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we don't come up with a plausible explanation, we'll be into the blame, and then we end up with shame. So
Yeah.
the issue is to have that understanding. So, like, I'm at the university right now. I'm in Indiana University, and there's a lot of construction going on here. And there are meetings, and there's this, and there's tension because universities are environments of evaluation by definition. And what does an environment of evaluation do to our autonomic nervous system?
It
Exactly.
puts us on defense.
Right. Chronically
We're being watched all the time.
being watched. And so the issue is it's a model that says that if you feel too secure, you won't do your work. But the model is wrong, because if you feel secure, you can be bold, creative, and expansive, because there are benefits you get from feeling safe. It's not laziness, it's strength. And this has been the whole paradox in our society. Our society tends to think that if you're scared, you'll work harder. All that really means is work is more movement. And so you see people moving a lot, but they're not being creative, they're not
Mm-hmm.
generating new ideas. So the real issue is we have to learn to make more people safe so they can be self empowered to be creative.
Yeah, I've heard you say, to make the world better, we make people safer. Can you use that? This is
Yeah.
essentially what you're saying, right?
Yeah, yeah. Or another one that's been extracted from things I said. The treatment is safety. Safety is the treatment.
Yeah.
Safety is the supports our health, physical health. Safety supports our mental health. Now, put that within an elementary school model and see how they deal with that.
Yeah.
They don't have a conceptualization of that. And what do you see with young kids? Some of them don't want to go to school. They have gut problems, and once they start having gut problems, that's subdiaphragmatic. Their body is going into a shutdown defense. So you can see the mobilization, the anxiety, and then you can see the shutting down.
And then we'll just give them medication to try to help them feel better, get them through the day.
Or help them not feel.
Yeah, exactly.
Go through that. And this goes, this whole notion of numbness of body. And when you deal with couples, that becomes part of the issue as well. How people give each other hugs, how they feel in terms of their intimacy, whether they have their bodies are numb. The whole issue is the body can't feel good. And this is in terms of all forms of intimacy and relationship unless the body feels safe. And we have this paradox. You notice I use the word body feeling safe.
Mm-hmm.
And that may not be the same thing as you thinking that you're safe.
Right. That's a great distinction.
And the reason we get into that dilemma, and it's actually the dilemma of our society, is we think safety is created by the removal of threat. Just think about larger armies, TSA agents, principals carrying guns, all these things that we think will remove threat. We don't realize that those are not cues of safety. So the removal of threat is in general good. I'm not saying you should have threat around you, but it's not sufficient. It may be necessary, but it's not sufficient. So we need cues of safety. And then we get into this whole paradox. This is a paradox of child rearing. that people have always felt if the child is too safe, the child won't be motivated.
Mm-hmm.
And that
Right. They'll be enabled and coddled and
right. And I would say that that's probably not true. And I use the word probably because I haven't done the research on it.
yeah.
But in terms of the plausibility of the model, if an individual has the ability to co-regulate with another, their bodies become more resilient and they can self-regulate for longer periods of time before coming back to co-regulate. So it's
Uh-huh.
the paradox is that yes, this strong bonding, this strong interaction, this codependence at birth or during early infancy provides the resilience that the child could now go away from the parent and be bold. And you probably see things like this in your relationships because
Mm-hmm.
some people who have strength and interaction in their relationship, they can function very well, and others are so really insecure because I've seen this in my laboratory with people working with me, where maybe every half hour they'll get a text from their significant other. It's like, are you there?
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
It's like because the level of insecurity is so great, the level of vulnerability that they have to continually reach out to co-regulate, and we have to respect that. So I've never ever told anyone who worked with me that they shouldn't respond if their wife texts or their girlfriend texts them, that they shouldn't respond. But I hope that they would enable time where we could work. I don't like it in my office with them,
Sure.
but you could see what was going on. There was a need to touch the other person to get some level of
Mm-hmm.
co-regulation.
Yeah. So it seems like if I had to encapsulate the body of your work, it's all about safety, it seems like to me.
Yeah, yeah, and
Like the importance of safety, because from safety, we can learn, be creative, innovate. We can go out and be
right.
bold in the world.
Yeah. Now, let's deconstruct what you said. Safety allows emergent properties to occur, meaning it allows creativity, it allows appreciation for aesthetics, it allows even spirituality, it allows relationships. But safety also enables us to learn, to accumulate, pull in information, because we're not competing with detecting features of threat.
Yeah.
So, and also in terms of like language delays, which is really something you see in certain communities or environments, especially those which are dangerous environments, is that if your body is in a state of constant defense, it shifts the transfer function of your middle ear structures. What does that mean? It means you don't hear the ends of words.
Uh-huh.
So you hear the initiation of a word, you just don't hear the end because your ear structures, your middle ear structures, are biased to detect predator sounds, which are low frequencies and not the high frequency harmonics of voice. So you see it all
Wow.
folding in.
Yeah.
And in our society, what do we do when a child has language delays? We yell at the child.
Mm-hmm.
We accuse the child. We don't
Speech
say,
problems.
right. Oh, the words are problems, disabilities, deficits, special education, and what are the treatments? Are the treatments to say, let's help you regulate and calm down, or is it reprimand and more pressure on the child? So the educational model misses something very important. It misses the most profound and important intervening variable, which is our own physiological state. And in terms of couples, what is the most powerful intervening variable is that physiological state of the dyad, of each individual within the dyad.
Yeah.
And you, from a therapeutic or clinical level, you might use words like saying, oh, he or she is tightly wrapped and anxious, and they shouldn't be, or lethargic and depressed. Now, if you ever said to someone, you shouldn't be anxious, you shouldn't be tightly wrapped, you're not going to get anywhere with that
No.
because implicit in the body, these features are defense, and the body is defending. It's not a cognition. If people wanted to be safe and relaxed, they would be, but they
Yeah.
can't.
Hey, if you want to uplevel your life, your relationship life specifically, I want you to consider our Relationship Mastery program. It's 9 months of complete transformation where you become a better listener, a better communicator, you learn how to have secure relationships, and you get an experiential taste of that. You feel seen and supported and challenged to reach your relationship goals. And really, you become a better communicator. So many people have gone through this course now. And we have a done with you version of it now, which is amazing, where you get assigned a private relationship coach. You get to do live group coaching with me once a month and ask me anything you want. There's office hours where you get to meet with one of our coaches to nerd out on the curriculum. And the community is very strong. And these are people who care a lot about relationships, and they want to get what they want to get, which is they want to be in a relationship and not betray themselves, right? They want to get the relationship they want while being true to themselves. That's what most of us want. And this course is the path for you to get that. Here's what one of our participants in the past has said about this course.
My name is Jess. I'm from a tiny town in the mountains. I have been in Deeper since September, and then I actually did Jason's End Your Struggle with Him program. I had a pretty intense breakup. I had a fiance that left a couple weeks before the wedding, and I was already on a growth path, but that really just projected me into looking inward more. Really what I think I've learned the most is that it's so much about learning about myself. And of course it's learning about how to relate to other people and communicate and be respectful, but also just learning that it's okay for myself to have needs, to set boundaries with other people. I was kind of always a yes girl. So I think the biggest shift has been learning that in saying no to other people, it's actually saying yes to myself, which leaves me more empowered and able to show up even better for people I care about. It's funny because when I got the first program, it was like, end your struggle with him. And I was like, oh, this is great. I'll learn about, how to fix things with my ex. And I was like, oh, no. Yeah, Jason's material is very confronting in a way that I really received well, because it really challenges you to realize that, you don't need to have a relationship to be okay with yourself. I was with a partner when I first started the course, and then we've since actually set some pretty healthy boundaries and just decided to take some time apart to do growth. We're still pretty good friends, so that's nice, and just kind of see how it unfolds from there. So.
All right. Amazing words from one of our heartfelt students here at the Relationship School. If you want to change your life like they did, go to relationshipschool.com/relationship mastery, and we'll see you in there. What would you say to a person who might be blaming themselves in a relationship and like, gosh, I can't get it together, but there's this intelligent response going on a neuroceptive level that they're definitely not tuned into? Like, how can some person get out of self-blame here?
Well, I actually
What's the reminder?
I think the reminder is to respect your body. I mean, and the disrespect, what they're doing is disrespecting their body. They're getting angry at their body and trying tell the body not to respond. And so the way out, the metaphor that I like to use is that we need to develop a better or a more developed sense of self-compassion for ourselves, a sense of respect for our body, and a love for who we are, as opposed to a distaste for what we're not, the limitations. And so we have to, we are who we are, and we have to learn who we are. And through that learning of who we are, we have to respect our attributes and even respect what might be called deficits, but they really respect our differences.
Yeah. What's the one tip that you can give a couple in their attempts to feel safe? Like, because if safety is one of the points of a relationship, to create a safe bond so that then we can go out and play and be creative in the world, what's like one thing a listener can do to feel safe with each other? You
actually answered it. And because when you use the word play, what are you doing when you're playing? And what we want to do is use the historical definition of play, which was interactive with another person, not with a game or a toy by ourselves. Mm-hmm. And what is playful behavior? It's movement, which is mobilizing our body with sympathetic activation, but it's using voice and face and social engagement. So we're doing a neural exercise of state regulation when we play. And that's what couples need to do. They need to learn how to play. And if we go back to the history of when couples start or when you meet, it tends to be playful.
Yeah, it's a lot of play.
It's play. Yeah. And it moves into these other realms of a play is trivial or it's a diversion. But play is important. And I go back even to the notion of schools. Play is important for children. Play is important for everyone. Play is important for your dogs and cats. They need it as well. Uh-huh. And when you have kids, I mean, the beauty of having children is intuitively,
I
you
know.
know you have to play,
Yeah.
and you become the child that you never were. You do that, and you also use voices, like you talk like uh, a mother to a newborn baby. Males will talk
Yeah.
that way,
Yeah. We change our voice to play with the kids and be
right?
silly. And
Yeah, but the changing of the voice is consistent with the sounds that trigger our nervous system of safety. Hot, more higher pitch melodic voices, motherese. How do men even talk to their dogs? They don't talk with a low frequency monotone.
yeah.
They go up into a higher pitch.
Hmm.
That's what we need if we want to be playful. We need to maintain the prosody, the intonation in our voice. We need to when we get triggered ourselves, we need to stop and take that aha moment. We have to explain without criticizing, and this is not easy,
Yeah.
that we trigger each other. And the whole issue with couples can be very dedicated and loving each other, but they can also trigger each other in the most negative ways. Okay.
Yeah. Very primal too ways,
Oh, well,
right?
well, that's a
Just with a
critical.
look or a tone of
Oh,
voice can just,
yeah.
bam.
But the use of the word primal is a good selection of words, and that's neuroception. Primal, those things are wired into our body, and those are the aha moments. And what our body does is we try to attribute intentionality when our body reacts that way, and often these uh, insults to our body have no intention.
Okay, so let me ask you a really important point here, a question about this tone of voice thing. So it sounds like if I have you right, a tone of voice. Let's say I have a tone of voice, for example, sometimes with my wife, and she'll react, right?
Yeah.
And it's probably unlikely that she'll ever get over
Mm.
reacting around my tone of voice because that's her built-in threat
Yeah.
response that's necessary, right?
Well,
So she can't necessarily like get over that.
you have to stop there because you're loading a lot. Okay, so first of all, your voice doesn't have that great range of intonation. So that part is clear. It's a narrow frequency band. Now, informing her about how her nervous system would respond, especially to male voices, um, is helps provide a top-down uh, narrative that
Sure.
will affect her.
Which she gets.
Okay, so let's go through another part, and this is a story that a colleague of mine, a psychiatrist, was visiting, and we were having a nice conversation, and then suddenly, whoosh, her whole face changed, and she said, "Your voice reminded me of my father."
Of course.
Okay, now, and she had a trauma history. Okay.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so but she was aware enough not to take that physiological shift and hijack her behavior and become defensive and aggressive to me.
Yeah, because she knew that. She had enough self-awareness.
Yeah.
She'd done some work on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what the cue to me was, be careful not to go into too low frequencies, as in make sure I kept my voice modulated.
Yeah. Which is my work.
Yeah. So I actually realized that when I talk in front of people, so you can see on some of the YouTubes and stuff, my voice is a higher pitch and more melodic than I do normally on a one-to-one. It's
Mm.
because of the engagement behaviors, the feedback in the environment. So I move into that range without any awareness. I just go there.
Yeah.
And so in your situation, or what you're talking about with your wife, is one, you're smart people, you have a model of what our body responds to. And once our body responds to it, it's now a stop and an aha and a wow.
Hmm.
And then it almost becomes humorous.
Like a respect. Like, whoa, there's
Oh,
the animal in me or whatever.
right. And,
Yeah.
and it becomes almost a humor to it,
Hmm.
because it's something that you did not prepare to do. You didn't have the intention, and the other person didn't have the intention. And wow, look how this occurs. It's like a reflex that you discovered.
Yeah.
And it's not to get angry at that reflex, but it's also to acknowledge it exists and to respect it.
Hmm.
And so as you respect it, it should start to downregulate, because it's so near the threshold of reacting, it's there because the body didn't feel safe. So what happens with the cues of safety or safety as a treatment is the threshold to react to these become tempered. So you don't react as rapidly and your body stays within a broader range.
Totally. Cool. Thank you. As we wind down here, a couple more questions. Why do you think it seems like people are catching on a little more to the neurobiology stuff, adult attachment, that's becoming more popular? What's going on that's catching people's attention here?
Okay, so let's start. I think the clinical world has become very, very aware that there's a biology underneath the behavior. Okay, let's just start there.
Okay.
And this is now 5, 6, 7 decades of people focusing on behavior as behavior, psychological processes being psychological processes. I think the insights that have occurred over the past decade or so are that really underlying uh, our experiences, our subjective experiences, and our overt behaviors is a neurophysiological substrate. I think that polyvagal theory has had some impact because it was not a school of therapy. It was
Mm-hmm.
merely an explanation. It was a theoretical explanation of a lot of these experiences. And this enabled it to be very welcomed by many different theoretical perspectives without competition. So, in a sense, from trauma to couples, I mean, polyvagal theory has been embraced because it provides some of the missing information, missing
Yeah.
clues that help. The other part, and I think the most important point, is that when I talk about these things, so when I give talks, I often will say, I give a talk, people will say, "Wow, I learned a lot from your lecture." And I will say to them, "Really? I don't think you learned anything. I think all I did was confirm your intuitions. I gave you an explanation of what you already knew."
Mm.
And I think that's where the traction occurs. And
Okay.
that is that the sensitivity of being a good therapist, being a good human being, follows certain systematic uh, procedures, like being a good parent. But now we can see how that works. What does it mean to be a good or successful person in these interactions? We can see the neurophysiology and how this is actually helping the individual co-regulate support health, growth, and restoration.
Yeah. Wonderful. So cool. Self-regulation, co-regulation.
Yeah.
What's the so there's some people that might start in the therapeutic community
Yeah.
start to push back with co-regulation because it starts to feel like codependency, which was labeled as bad.
Mhm.
And then there was this many years of self-regulation, like, hey, my partner's triggered, that's kind of their problem. If
Mm.
I'm triggered, that's my problem. I need to deal with it myself.
I,
What's the value of self-regulation? Because I hear some people almost tossing it out.
I think self-regulation is what enables me to sit at the terminal and work if I need to work 6, 8 hours if I have to, or sit still for 4 hours. That's self-regulation. But it's the ability to self-regulate one's own physiological state really is based upon a platform of successful co-regulation.
Hmm.
So it's in a sense a derivative product. So if you have good experiences co-regulating, you can now self-regulate. And in the metaphoric world of some of these therapeutic models, people often like to say, well, you carry with you the image of the successful co-regulation.
Mm-hmm.
It's like the picture of the girlfriend or the wife on the
Sure.
desk.
Or the mother,
But
the ideal parent, whatever.
right, but there's more to it. See, I think it's a embedded sense of our own biological history that we have individually co-regulated, and we know what that is, and that gives us the power to be resilient. The resource, it's a power. It's a resource. So
Mm-hmm.
co-regulation creates the resource for self-regulation, and I think the mistake was made in thinking that the test was self-regulation, and it disrupted the individual from getting all the benefits of co-regulation,
Yeah.
and that means early development.
Got it. Great. And if we take a child in that grew up in a compromised environment, that got a kind of a funky co-regulation, right?
Yeah.
That's going to be the template. So self-regulation for them might even be harder.
Absolutely.
Because the co-regulation was harder in the beginning. Is that
Absolutely.
true? Okay.
So if we think about classroom behaviors, I mean, classroom behaviors are it's almost like looking at a experimental paradigm. Who are the kids who are disruptive in the classroom, have difficulty self-regulating? I should say, not all of them, many of them come from environments that are extraordinarily challenged, where there isn't safety in the home and there isn't successful co-regulation. So you actually can see that taking them out of a difficult situation, putting them into a social situation, they can function very well in it.
Or let's say they grew up in a home that wasn't, quote, challenging by like abuse standards, but they grew up very privileged, had everything they wanted, but they just were given a phone all the time. And that was their mode of regulation.
Okay, there's actually interesting history. I'm going to kind of move to a little story.
Okay.
I have a very good friend who is an architect, and he then became a family therapist. And he wrote a little book, and the book was really about space, living space. And he had this a little questionnaire. He would ask people, where were your memories? What was the space that you had the most positive memories? And people would describe being in a family party in a small apartment in a living room, but being very, very happy. And then as these families got more successful, they bought larger and larger homes until they got, in a sense, we call them McMansions. Where they now created isolation within the family from the socialization that they had when they were poor. So the kids had literally a wing of the house, and they were now totally isolated.
Their own bathroom, their own room, their own everything.
So proud of it. We can give our kids their own room, their own this, their own that.
Yeah.
And what is being taken away is that co-regulation and interdependence as part of a developmental model. So what we think is success may often not be success because we don't have a good understanding of what our bodies need.
Yeah. And so when you give a child a phone, and most adults are regulating on a phone or a screen, that's some form of regulation, right?
Yeah, but that's part of also, I would used to make these statements with the phone. We took the voice from the face, and with the texting, we took the words from the voice. So we kept removing more and more of the cues that our body needs to socially regulate. And we also did something else. We removed the principle of synchronicity, or things occurring at the same time, and reciprocity. So that if you send a text, so the question I would always ask my groups when I talk is, when you send a text, how long before your body gets, if the response is delayed for a period of time, how long a period before your body gets a visceral response? So if you text, let's say you text your wife, how long a delay can you tolerate without getting a response? Okay?
The delay tolerance, nice.
Yeah, but what it's really saying is, physiologically, we are not wired to engage and to delay.
And to not have a response, right?
Right. So we get that response, and then what do we do with that response? Well, we send another text, and we use capital letters now. We send because we're now pounding on a door and no one's home, and we have this, and you follow the bit, and your couples may have this. So the issue is, what does the phone do? See, I have one right here. What does the phone do for us, and what vulnerabilities does it create? Does it turn off? Does it force us to turn off our bodily feelings and needs to co-regulate because the interactions are too unreliable and meaning too dangerous for us?
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I mean, it makes sense, because I often tell couples, like, you don't want to work anything out over a phone, over texting. Please don't, fight over text. Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Stephen. This has been really great. Winding down, just tell us where you're headed, what you're up to. What's the most exciting thing on your plate right now?
I continue to keep busy. I have 2 jobs. I'm a little over 50% at Indiana University, where my wife took the job as director of the Kinsey Institute, and so I came here. And I'm creating a trauma research center. And what I'm trying to do is create a portal, a way of individuals who have experienced sexual violence to be witnessed, to provide information, to develop a model to explains that our abuse histories and trauma histories may lead to disruptions in the ability to co-regulate. I'm doing research on that.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also starting projects on the effects of medical treatments, especially medical treatments below the diaphragm, and whether they feed back and affect our sense of, just like sexual violence would do. They were affecting similar organs, and our brain may not be able to distinguish uh, the intentionality of what's happened. And so many people who have subdiaphragmatic surgeries, their sexuality has changed and their ability to relate to others changed.
Wow.
So that's some of the work I'm doing.
That's exciting. A quick question on that, just because you mentioned it. Would you say that most sexual dysfunction is usually some kind of fear threat response of the system shutting down below the diaphragm?
I would say that it's probably linked to a history in which the subdiaphragmatic vagus, part of the autonomic nervous system going below the diaphragm, has been recruited in defense.
Yeah.
And it's recruited in defense when a person has immobilized, dissociated, perhaps even
Some kind of
defecated,
threat. Yeah.
or passed out, been restrained. And one point I forgot to make in our discussion is the mammalian nervous system finds two cues as extremely lethal. One is restraint, and the other one is isolation. And everything else is about the metaphors of those. So when you talk about the fear, even when talk about the texting, it's the metaphor of being isolated. And so the issue of how are we not isolated? We're not isolated if we can have the opportunity to co-regulate. If we have the opportunity to co-regulate, we then have greater resources to self-regulate.
Yeah. Wow, man, I just love the work you're doing and all the heart and soul that you and your wife have put into in the trenches with people and just given us so many gifts to the world. So I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And people can look on my webpage.
Yeah, where can they find you?
StephenPorges.com. And
we'll put that in the show notes.
That would be great. Okay. Well, thank you, Jason.
Thanks again, Steve.
Nice talking to you.
Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you got something of value here and that you integrate an action step by sharing this episode with a friend to discuss what you've learned or the ways in which you might relate or identify with what was discussed. Maybe journal about it. Thanks again.
If your spouse or partner has threatened to leave you, or you've already been broken up with, or you're thinking about breaking up with your significant other, or maybe even contemplating divorce, I want you to do a few things first. Go to relationshipschool.com/rescue. All right. That way you can rescue this thing if it's salvageable. All right. I wrote a very elaborate PDF ebook and I recorded some videos for you to save your relationship. And I think it's a really good thing to, at the very least, go through this course. Now, if you just got broken up with, if the relationship just ended, you'll also want to do this if you want to salvage or save the relationship. relationshipschool.com/rescue. As you know, I've dedicated my life to helping people with their relationships, right? I want to solve this problem so that all of you can work through your differences and have fulfilling, amazing, badass partnerships and relationships, family, coworkers, friends, whoever. And I have trained a ton of relationship coaches, almost 100 certified relationship coaches, to help you specifically work through your relationship challenges. So I want to invite you to a special deal we're offering to the podcast listener where you can get 50% off your first month of coaching with one of our amazing relationship coaches. Okay, if you're tired of therapy, it feels like that's going around in a circle, or you want to actually set goals and accomplish your relationship goals, hire a relationship coach. Okay, go to relationshipschool.com/get coaching now, and then use the coupon code FIRST50 to get the 50% deal off your first month of relationship coaching. Super psyched to have our amazing coaches serve you and help you get to the next level. Hey, thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel. Share one of these videos with a friend. We want to help the planet get their act together around relationships. And you are one of them, so thank you.